Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Questionable Wisdom number 22. And yes, as always, I'm in a weird setting. I'm doing laundry down here, so there's background noise from the washing machine. My backdrop is just the ceiling of my basement, and the lighting is this big fluorescent light over here. So yes, I'm breaking all the rules. At least I'm aware of it. I'm going to address that elephant in the table. That elephant in the living room, and then we're going to get on to the content. Once again, if you are here for production quality, you're on the wrong channel. I can suggest a lot of channels for production quality. The only point of this channel is that it is time to discuss some things with my friends when I don't have time to discuss things face to face with them. This is the 22nd installment, and I had been going through suggestions that people had offered me, and thanks again for that. The last couple have been things that people wanted me to talk about. Next up on the list would be, we just did the Addams Family. So, Halloween and its origins was suggested by Trish. This is not going to be on that subject, just because I don't think my particular perspective adds very much to what's already out there. I will add a very excellent history of Halloween and its traditions, which I have found, and which includes literally everything I would have talked about. It talks about ghosts, it talks about vampires, it talks about Samhain, it talks about autumn, it talks about everything connected to Halloween. Great documentary. Look for it down in the description. Highly recommend you check it out. They're not sponsoring me. I just think everyone should read it. Let's see. Bill Anderson also said Halloween. Ruth Jones said the different songs you sing and their origins. They come from all over the place, and really I don't have that much else to say about it other than listen to indie artists. You'll find some neat things. I started getting into finding weird songs back when mp3.com was a place where artists could upload their stuff and get exposure, and then anyone could download for free, and that's how I found a lot of weird things like the Arrogant Worms version of The Last Saskatchewan Pirate, Pirates in the Bath, Tatsumaki Senpukyako's I'm Surprised. A lot of weird off-the-wall things that nobody's ever heard of. That's where I got my love for bands nobody's ever heard of. That and my parents introducing me to Prairie Home Companion at a young age. He showcased a lot of indie productions. So nowadays the way to do that is check out some YouTube music channels. And really the point of knowing a lot of cool songs is slogging through a lot of crap. I mean, that's the same way as how do you find a cool horror movie? Well, you watch 10 bad horror movies, that's how. How do you find a really cool song that nobody knows about? You listen to 10 bands that suck. The thing is, suck is a relative thing. Some band that you think sucks, somebody else might enjoy. Some band you enjoy, somebody else might not so much appreciate. But I've found a few that everybody seems to like, and I sing them because I sing songs. And really where a lot of it comes from is taking deep dives into things that interest me. I know probably 20 songs about Wonderland. Why? Well, because I'm me, and I'm from Wonderland, and I love Wonderland. And so I periodically just search for songs about Wonderland. And between what comes up in those searches and the algorithm saying, hey, I bet he'd like this, the YouTube algorithm actually works pretty well for me. Pandora, also a great place for undiscovered bands. That's really all I've got to say about that. Moving right along, Elise wants to hear about different types of tea. I'm going to have to save that for a later video because I'm going to need source material to talk about that. I can't just do it off the cuff, which is what I'm doing right now. And Mark Wood suggested the statistical safety of trick-or-treating versus urban legend. It would be a short video, but I don't mind doing it. I'm going to do that closer to Halloween time, though. So that is everything except that at one point Joanna said that she wanted me to talk about why it is that the chips at the bottom of the bag are more flavorful than the ones at the top. That's because the flavoring is carried by a powder and gravity exists. If this is a problem for you, store the bags upside down and you'll be fine. And that's all there is to say about that. That pretty well wraps up all the suggestions that I've had. As always, if you have questions, put them in the comments. That's the whole point of Questionable Wisdom. That's why I called it that. And we are now at about the 5-minute mark. So, I generally make these things about 15 minutes long. Sometimes I get to ranting. A lot of the time I have to pare this down. So, I'm going to take a pretty basic subject. One of my goals in this podcast, one of the things that I would like to see, podcast, it's not as a vlog, whatever this is, this series of whatever the heck I'm doing in my basement, one of the points of it is that something that I think is very important is to promote communication between two different groups that don't communicate. Way back in the beginning, I started off talking about how this is a huge thing between Catholics and Protestants. Catholics and Protestants will argue for hours and insist that they are right and the other party is wrong because one of them believes in sanctifying grace and the other one believes in assurance of salvation. And of course, no Catholic is going to admit that there is assurance of salvation. That's a ridiculous concept that sets us up as being beyond the reach of sin and basically says that we no longer have to adhere to anything because we're already saved. Whereas Protestants will say that sanctifying grace is not a concept you'll find in the Bible. It is not a valid theological concept from the point of sola scriptura, and it's something that was made up by man, and you can't believe in human doctrines. Spoiler alert. The assurance of salvation is the Protestant rebranding of sanctifying grace. They mean the same exact thing. Yes, you can find nuance, because every one of the 30,000 Christian churches thinks something a little different, but if you break it down to what the terms mean, sanctifying grace is the assurance of salvation. They're the exact same thing. There's nuance as to how we arrive at it in any given theology, but there's no good arguing over the terms because they're just terms, and they're terms for the same thing. This happens a lot. It happens between conservatives and liberals who want the same thing, but they use different words, so they're mad at each other. It happens between atheists and theists who want the same thing, but they use different words, so they're mad at each other. It happens between Jews and Christians because they want the same thing, but they use different words. So enough beating that dead horse. Today I'm here to talk about broadly the problem of evil, and more narrowly, the worst thing ever. There is a non-argument that happens between theists and atheists that I would like to address, and that I'm going to address now that I've got my little soapbox here and nobody can interrupt me. One of the most popular, I'm not going to say the best or most compelling, but one of the more popular arguments leveled by atheists against the theist mindset is the idea that a creator God cannot exist, or at least cannot be a good guy, because there are bad things. This is classically called the problem of evil. It's been argued for centuries. It's a very fascinating field of study. If you have not looked into the problem of evil, the best jumping off place I can think of is I've got a book called The Legend of Zelda and Philosophy. And it's great because it takes a popular pop culture vantage point for jumping off and delves into a lot of the great classical problems of classical ethics and classical theology, philosophy in general, not just theology. But it's got a great piece there on the problem of evil and why the goddesses allow such a thing as not just Ganondorf, but monsters in general in their creation. Brilliantly sums up all the points. So the too long didn't read version of the problem of evil. The problem of evil is that if God is infinite and God is good, then there's no room for evil in the universe. Simply put. If God is good, then he is infinite, then the universe is all infinitely good, and there's no place where you could possibly put evil, so therefore evil does not exist. Since we don't live in such a universe, clearly evil does exist, there cannot be a God. The classical theistic response to this is that, so in a universe created by an infinite benevolent God, there could not be evil unless it fulfilled a greater good than having just a good universe alone. at which point the atheists have generally already called shenanigans. But the idea goes like this, that if we were just good and happy and contented from our infancy until the time we die, there's no point in learning to talk. There's no point in learning to feed ourselves. There's no point in learning to defend ourselves from predators, because there aren't any. There's no point in studying other languages or other cultures. There are no other cultures. There are no cultures at all, because we're all happy and content, and we get born and we sit there being happy. And presumably we don't die. I'm going to get back to all of that in a moment, because the atheists accuse the theists of believing in nonsense, because a benevolent God could not have created a universe like this, because this is a bad universe. And also because we all die, and that's the worst evil possible. So that's why I said I'm talking more narrowly about the worst evil possible. A lot of people start and end a conversation with somebody outside of their mindset entirely from the point of view of their own mindset. When you say it like that, it sounds dumb, but trust me, it does happen. A lot. And I'm going to condense this into a joke that I'm very fond of. My father heard it from a priest once, but lots of other people have said it. The argument goes like this. It's a good thing that I don't like onions, because if I liked them, I would eat them, and I can't stand them. Think about that for a moment. It's a silly little joke, but it's got some depth to it. Inside of the mindset that eating onions, by the way, I love onions. I should have substituted like vanilla or something that I can't stand in there for onions, but whatever it is that you don't like, whether you don't like sour grapes, or you don't like hot sauce, or if you don't like whatever it is that you can't stand, it's a good thing that you don't like to eat that, because if you did like to eat that, you would eat it, and wouldn't that be disgusting? Well, no, it wouldn't, because if you liked it and ate it, you would be in a different mindset. Okay, so the exact same argument gets used by atheists all the time. It goes like this. There cannot possibly be a benevolent God, because a benevolent God would not allow evil. And it's a tremendous evil when good people are killed randomly, and since a good God would not permit such a thing, there cannot be a God. I call foul twice during this argument. The problem with it is that from the atheist point of view only is death the worst evil possible. If you're inside the atheist point of view, I've got a better argument that you can use against the existence of God, which is, I don't believe it. The matter's already settled. You've already decided you don't believe in God, and so you're using circular thinking to say that because I don't believe in God, I have a viewpoint that allows me to build a construct wherein I do not believe in God. Great job. You've just gotten nowhere, but you got there very fast. Here's the thing. From the theistic point of view, death isn't the worst evil at all. In fact, it's not even a very evil evil. Look at this, I got death on my socks. I got Jack Skellington, and there's these little death heads on there. I'm a Mexican. We got sugar skulls. We make candy out of skulls. Celebrate it, and the Day of the Dead, which people in this country look at the Day of the Dead, they're like, oh, like Halloween, you celebrate scary things. No, there's nothing scary in Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead isn't about anything scary at all. It's about death. At which point Americans, and specifically atheistic Americans, have already lost their mind, or else concluded we have. The thing is, we Mexicans, we're not scared of death, because we're theists, and we don't see the point. I've met a lot of atheists, by the way, who are not scared of death, so I don't want to throw shade the whole lot of them. I'm not here to say I'm right and you're wrong. I'm here to say this is why these two groups can't talk to each other. And this works the other way around, theists. Don't get too smug there, because a lot of theists do things like this with atheists. They do things like, the theist version of it's a good thing I don't like onions is, you hate God, right? Yes, I hate God, says no atheist ever, but the puppet in the movie says this. Well, how can you hate something that doesn't exist? Ha, checkmate. No, that's not how you do this at all. That's just, it's a good thing I don't like onions, because if I liked them, I'd eat them, and I can't stand them. From the point of view of the theistic mindset, atheists hate God. From the view of the point of the atheistic mindset, the atheists don't hate God any more than they hate, like, Dr. Claw or Darth Vader or something like that. They don't think he's real, so they treat him as a fictional character, and they don't hate him. They just don't like what his followers have done with him. So, the point I'm getting at is I'm talking about death. A lot of atheists point to death as the reason there couldn't be a God. And barring that, suffering in general. We're going to get to suffering in a moment. How long have I been recording here? 15 minutes already. This is one of them rants. So, there's the argument that people die and therefore there's not a God because God would not permit an evil. I'm over here like, who says it's evil? Now, from the nihilistic atheist standpoint, it is the worst evil ever. I get it. I understand. I'm not discounting your point of view. If there is nothing but material existence, then the lack of material existence is as bad as it gets. I understand. I don't agree, not because the logic isn't sound. The logic is perfect. The premise does not align with somebody else's worldview. A lot of people don't understand this. You can use proper logic and still be wrong if you start from a flawed premise. So, if you're talking about the theistic mindset, that is to say, if you are talking to a theist about cosmology, and you are trying to say to him that God couldn't exist, you are to him speaking gibberish, because from your point of view, death is an evil, and from our point of view, it's not all that bad. I mean, it is an evil. I mean, Christ came to earth to, among things, defeat death and offer resurrection and whatnot. But we look at death totally differently. We look at death, and so does most spirituality. It's not just limited to Christianity or even Western thought in general. The idea that consciousness is something that endures past death. You find this in the Hindu idea of reincarnation, of course. You find it in lots of places, concept of an afterlife, not just Christianity, but the Elysian fields of ancient Greek paganism and the ancestor worship of Shinto and such like. The idea that when people's bodies cease functioning, their personality doesn't entirely go away. They disagree on the mechanism behind this, and a lot of religions, mine included, don't even bother with the mechanism. Dryer ended. Good job. So from that point of view, from the point of view that when I die, I go to heaven and see my mom again, and also meet my patron saint Miguel Perón. We have some cool conversations with him, and I behold the beatific vision where I am united eternally with the splendor of God. That doesn't sound like the worst evil ever. So you can't have it both ways. You can't believe that death is the worst thing ever and try to convince a Christian that death is the worst thing ever unless you first convince him that God exists. And you're trying to do it backwards. You're trying to convince a Christian that God doesn't exist because death is the worst evil ever. You haven't gotten there yet. You have put the cart before the horse. So, instead of doing that, what you could do is a much more compelling argument, and that's the problem of suffering. This world is not just. Now, if you have studied the problem of evil in any detail, or if you have read the aforementioned chapter from The Legend of Zelda and Philosophy, you will know that the counter-argument to that exists as well. Atheists think that a benevolent God would not torture an innocent child with diphtheria or malaria or some sort of degenerative spinal disease which gives them a crooked back and puts them in severe pain. Pneumonia. Infants dying of pneumonia at the age of 6. What kind of benevolent God does this? And the theistic answer to it is that a benevolent God has set up an experiment wherein we are required to do something about the evil. So really the theistic answer to this, and I'm not trying to convert anyone here. In case we've lost sight of what this talk is about, I'm just trying to explain how to talk to each other because this ground has been covered. And frankly, I'm kind of sick of going over these topics over and over again. So I'm just laying both hands out on the table and saying, hey, atheists, the theists have thought about this, okay? They're not stupid. It's not that they haven't noticed that the world sucks, okay? Cool your jets. Theists, the atheists are actually aware of the problem, and they have actually come up with some concepts. The problem is people living in information silos and not talking to each other. I'm trying to bring you to a place where you can actually appreciate what the other person's talking about, whether you agree or not. Back to the discussion. So, the problem of suffering. Now, suffering is an evil. Having malaria is not a good thing. I don't care who you are. So why does God allow the child to have malaria? The God allows the child to have malaria because that forces us to do something about it and to learn and to grow. The best way I can explain why this is to say, okay, guys, you're so smart, you figure it out. Better world, what's it look like? And generally the atheistic answer is going to be, well, you just don't build suffering when you invent the world. There you go, solve the problem. No, you didn't. All you did is look at it from the point of view of the universe that you do know and complain about the part of it that you don't like. What you've not done is suggest an alternative. Now, God is infinite and probably could have created another universe. Okay, fine. We're going to take that concept, put it in a little box. Yes, we are entering the realm of this is the best of all possible universes. But here's the thing. The universe that, in my experience, atheists generally want, doesn't make any sense. Because if you just tweak the world so suffering doesn't exist, we're back to that conversation I was talking about earlier. You're born blissfully happy. You're in your cradle and you don't have to eat, because if you had to eat, then you would be hungry, and that's a suffering. So we got to get rid of hunger. So you're in your cradle. You're not hungry, so you don't have to learn to feed yourself. Now, other added benefit is you don't have to poop. We've got babies that don't poop. This world's sounding better and better. So if you don't have to eat, and if you're not going to be eaten, means you don't have to work. There's nothing to work towards. Which means all your needs are taken care of, so you don't need to learn things. You don't need your parents. You don't need language. What would you do with it? And all of this sounds very smug and, again, sounds very condescending. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to point out that such a world would be so vastly different from existence as we know it that really it's no fair talking about it because we don't know what that would look like. So, atheists, my advice is if you're going to approach a theist and say that this world is nonsensical from the theistic point of view because a benevolent God wouldn't do X and Y and Z and all these little bits and pieces of terrible things that exist in our universe, you can't just say he could have made this world without that. If you want to say he could have created something else, it's fine, but you got to give me some idea of what it is you're talking about as to what it was he could have built. It's the same as the problem of free will. That all the time I hear arguments like, if God is good, then why did he create murderers? And the obvious answer is, well, he didn't create murderers, he created people who chose to be murderers. Okay, fine, well, why does God allow murderers? Why does God allow rapists? Well, because God allows free will, and free will has to be carte blanche or it's not free. If you want him to rein that in, that means that you want God to make a universe where things are permissible to some point, and then there are certain things that are not permissible. For some reason, murder doesn't happen or can't happen. So what does that mean? Well, it either means that people can't die, which is problematical, or it means that people can't plan to hurt one another or can't physically hurt one another. You're basically putting all of creation, not just humanity, but all of creation in handcuffs. Basically, anytime you transgress Not what you consider law or what society agrees on as law, but anytime you transgress God's law, anytime you do something which is not perfectly in keeping with the idea of how the universe should run, you hit a brick wall. You're not allowed to do that. You are not able to say an unkind word or sleep with your neighbor's wife or forget to take the trash out or whatever. You're not able to. All you do is what you are programmed to do in the purpose of the machine. And that brings us to the final point, that all theologies think that life has some purpose to it, that God's running some sort of experiment, that we are part of something that's going on, that this isn't the final product, that we are making something. So basically, we're lab rats. We're here for the purpose of whatever experiment it is that God's running. And all of a sudden, people start complaining that that sounds cruel and heartless. And I say, well, as opposed to what? My answer is that I use the fictional allegory, is what I call it. If I wrote a story wherein all the characters were happy and none of them faced any problems or difficulties, nobody would read that story. It's a bad story. Nothing happens in it. There's no action. There's no drama to drive the narrative forward. I think the same is true in creation. If God just created a petri dish full of things that had their needs met, once he had created it, what would he do with it? So my point is that creation is more nuanced than some of you might think, and that this discussion bears further discussion than just saying your God can't exist because there's evil in the world, so case closed, I'm done talking. Or, yeah, the world can exist with evil in it, even though there's a good God because he's making something bigger, case closed, end of discussion. No, the discussion is much bigger than that. The discussion is years long and well outside the scope of this conversation. But hopefully it has opened your mind to a few ideas. Hopefully you've learned something about the problem of evil, or if you already knew about the problem of evil, it gets you thinking about it more, because it's a very important thing to consider, because it has ramifications even outside of theology. It has ramifications in law or jurisprudence, or even in just, building games. This concept will come up, the idea of tension and drama from bad things you could classify as suffering. So I do hope you've enjoyed the talk. Don't forget to hit the thumbs down button if you didn't like this video, and I will hopefully see you the next time. Good night. Have a good one.